Welcome to SIC Talks number 111. I'm here with W. David Marx, heretofore known as David, as I refer to him in the conversation, author of the legendary guide to how the Japanese saved fashion today, and you could argue modern culture. Amatora, which came out about 10 years ago.
Yep.
Status and Culture, which came out, David, what, 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
3 years ago.
Only 3? Wow. Okay, got
Yeah.
it. I mean, and apropos of that, Blank Space, which came out on Tuesday, his new book, which is a cultural history of the 21st century, here featuring winsome cover art by our mutual friend Andrew Quo. But which I think the fact that Status and Culture only came out 3 years ago almost illustrates some of the underlying spirit of Blank Space, which is just shit happens so fast. I mean, just totally wild. Anyway, David, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great seeing you. It's the third time to see you this week. We were hanging out in real life yesterday, and I said, let's not talk. Let's save it for the pod. 'Cause I don't want to. I don't have to repeat myself.
Yeah, well, it's funny. There is so much to talk about. You and I have so many people in common, so many things in
Yep.
common. You know, we are of similar age. We've lived through a bunch of similar sort of like eras, which made reading and then later listening to Blank Space, because Cards on the Table, I read about the first 170 pages, and then in a rush to try to get to this conversation, listen to the audiobook for a few more chapters. I'm not quite to the end, which is what one of the things I want to talk to you about. But it's really interesting. But it just, I mean, David, I'm kind of, I have to say, I'm a little bit in awe of you because there is so much in this book. I was trying to figure out your writing process. Like, do you have the perfect mind, like bulletin board of index cards somewhere? Is there like a laboratory with, like moving red threads around and strings and stuff?
I mean, it's funny because I'd be like, "Oh, that's ridiculous, Ben." But yeah, I did actually at some point cut a big. I had this big piece of butcher paper, and I one of the things about this book is I wanted it to be a little bit more like Amateur in the sense that it followed specific characters.
Yeah,
And so, I would cut out like Kanye and Terry Richardson or whatever and put them on these little cards, Paris Hilton. And then I looked at the chapters and I looked at the threads I was following because it's trying to follow these 5 particular value shifts. And then I was trying to look at how they illustrated these. And so at some point I did diagram it out. But I mean, my process, which I'm always happy to share with any author, although I think it's not for everybody, is I have an outline that keeps expanding and there's a bullet point for every paragraph. And then I go off and read stuff or find things and I put them, in the outline. And then when I wake up every day to write, there's a bunch of stuff to start from. It's like, I want to get
sure.
these 2 quotes in there. I want to get these points in there. Oh, I don't have this. And I go, search for it, look for it. But, this is a book that could not have been written without the internet, in the sense of like, I needed to just be like, oh, I need the 3 articles about, Vice, and oh, I need to go find this specific Dazed and Confused interview, et cetera,
Sure.
et cetera. Like, and so some of that stuff's all gone. And Internet Archive was a godsend. I mean, one of the big ones we had talked about earlier was there was the notorious Gavin McInnes, and I guess it was all 3 of the founders interview in New York Press in
New York Press, yeah.
2002. It's just gone from the internet. And the only way I could find it was I went into the Internet Archive and I figured out what the New York Press website was. And then I found whatever the back issue was, and then I found the article. But it took actually like an hour to kind of dig through these dead links to find it. But anyway, I mean, I think the main point is I just have this process which lets me write pretty quickly. And then with this one, because it is stuff I'll remember. And the probably the bad part of the book is it sometimes goes too much in things that I do remember and some away from things that I am less interested in. But I was able to know, at least, like, I know I need to talk about these things. I need to talk about Glee. I've never seen an episode of Glee. Okay, I gotta go watch Glee. I need to talk about Gossip Girl. Okay, there's 3 amazing essays about Gossip Girl, and then I would just go read those and stack up quotes. And so I have this kind of process that lets me uh, put in as many references as possible, but I know my writing is always going to be dense and full of proper nouns, and there's definitely people who don't like that style and find it
Right.
impenetrable. But for me, when I talk about cultural change, when you talk about abstractly, I think it's not very interesting and it doesn't tell the full story. And so you need to tell who are the specific people, when did it happen, why did it happen, and you
Uh,
need the proper nouns.
100%. I was explaining to my father, I was talking to my father this morning, and talking about this conversation we were about to have, and I was just saying, and I'm reading the book, and I'm now when he called, I was listening to it, and was struck by the difference in the way I was processing it. When I'm reading it, it 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 strikes me more as a narrative. When I was listening to it, it strikes me more as like a collection of facts, which is not to take anything away from your narrative, but you realize, or your writing, but you realize in listening how much stuff is in it, right? And hence my question about index cards and that kind of thing. Um, when you think of it in those terms, are you trying to? I guess that what my parallel is to my newsletter, right, which is a kind of a collection of stories where I find patterns and stuff. Did you find yourself elucidating patterns that you didn't realize were there, or did you know what the patterns were ahead of time and kind of go after them?
I sold the book as just like I want to do a cultural history of the 21st century. I have been talking.
Which in and of itself is so like audacious, but
It's audacious, but I mean, like if I had to do this again, I would have written the book um, with an intro that's like, remember when people used to write these kind of biographies of the 60s, or
sure.
they would do a documentary about the 70s. Now, we don't do that anymore, of course, it's not allowed. But what if? What if I pretended to take this old method and applied it to the 21st century? That would be interesting. So I think there is like, some of the reviews are just like, how dare you have tried to do this, which I find so funny. But I just felt like there wasn't a book about the aughts. Colette Shade came out with Y2K, which is really about uh, not the it's kind of 1998 to 2008. It's like a personal memoir, but there hasn't just been like an aughts book. And then I
Right.
keep making the point that there wasn't even a decade name for the 2010s. We don't say like the teens. If you said, "Well, how are the teens for you?" They would look at you very oddly. And then
Well, I mean, especially, in light of Epstein and
yeah,
everything. So
post
that,
Epstein. But the point is, it's just like there hasn't been a book that just like stops and says like, can we have just a history of this period? So when I went into writing it, I was like, this will be fun. I'm really excited to like revisit this period. I wrote the first bit so fast, like I was like shocked about how much I understood and felt like there was this really clear narrative from 9/11 to the end of Bush and the beginning of Obama. Um, and then it got harder. I think the Obama period was much harder to write. And but in the middle of the book, I realized I don't know what I want to say until I've written it, which is like a really crazy way to
sure,
write a book.
sure.
But I had to, in some ways, get to at least like 75% in to be like, I see what it's pointing to now. And I knew that the selling out conceit, or like, art versus commerce, was probably a theme. I don't think I realized the counterculture one until probably a bit later. I didn't understand the idea that what the internet really does more than anything is let you evade norms, and that's kind of the superpower of the internet. I didn't realize that until much later, and so it just took me a while to put the patterns together, to bring the themes together, and then once I had the
Right.
themes, I went back and tried to say if something didn't fit these themes, it won't make the book.
Got it.
Not to
Speaking of
say,
not
not
making,
to say that, sorry, not to say that like everything, if it didn't fit a theme, it didn't happen. It was just more like if I thought it was a funny story, but it didn't illustrate what I was trying to say, I just felt like that was a bar I had to maintain.
you had to get over it. Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, speaking of completism, like the one of the reasons that I felt like after we saw each other last night, I could get through the rest of the book was that it's what 80 pages of notes or something like that. Like you ended up putting a huge chunk of the book into the citations. And I know there has been, I've heard you talk about how you started out at 110,000 or 144,000 words or whatever it is and got down to 85. Um, so I would imagine there's a fair amount of that kind of filtration. Is there anything that you lost from the book where you felt like I hate to lose this personally because it meant a lot to me individually, but like, yeah, it doesn't matter that much.
I had more backstory on the Paris Hilton sex tape, and that just sounds like funny and salacious. But I think actually, the more I think about it, it is one of these incredible illustrative representative moments in that it's revenge porn, right? So like Rick
Yeah,
Solomon, like divorced boyfriend of Paris Hilton, like releases the tape and gets his brother to sell it on a Czech website, and the website's called trustfundgirls.com. Like just every kind of detail of the whole story is both like disgusting, but also kind of foreshadows what can happen in the
I
21st
was going
century
to
with the
say,
internet.
yeah,
Yeah. So I thought that would, that got all shrunk, and the ridiculousness of the fact that the tape starts with an American flag and it says, um, September 11th, 2001, we will never forget. So just like the idea also that 9/11 kitsch patriotism was like kind of still in the
sure.
air, 2 or 3 years later, I think people should remember. So there was just little things like that got cut. And there was a bunch of jokes that got cut, I like put them back. And like every time the editor's like, we don't need this, I was like, no, it's got to go back. Um, so I think it was just more, there was just more stuff, but yeah.
Okay. Well, it's funny. I mean, part of it because I wonder, like, I'm looking at this. So for those that are listening after the fact, we are doing this live on Substack, and in the crowd are a bunch of cultural luminaries, some of whom are very adjacent to the book. Jeff Carvalho is here, Mordecai Rubinstein is here, Steph Yaka is here.
Nice.
So, among others, and I haven't looked at everybody that's here, but in any case, I just wondered. It's like, yeah, I really wanted to tell that story about. Uh, Andy Spade and the establishment, the move of Kate Spade to Jack Spade, but because that ties back to Almatora and to my own personal sartorial things, but I just had to cut it because it didn't, connect. Anything like
I
that?
mean, even I mean, there's a lot of menswear and streetwear in the book, and I think like another problem with the book. And I talked to Lauren Sherman pretty early to be like, what's the women's wear stuff that I'm not putting in here because I was just
Sure.
thinking about menswear too much. Just that menswear is a much better narrative in the 21st century because menswear was not a thing and then it became a thing. So
Yeah.
going kind of from 0 to 1 just makes it a better story. And then to go from how does Pharrell Williams of the Neptunes go from being the hit maker to then at the head of Louis Vuitton. I mean, that's also something I think that is a major arc and a major story and it involves the big fashion conglomerates, it involves China, it involves the rise of streetwear, it involves celebrity culture, all these things. And so that story I felt like needed to be told. But I was always like, well, I don't want it just to be like I have menswear in there because I wrote a menswear book. And like it had
Yeah, for
to
sure.
say something more. Now, Tyler Watamanuck, is that how you say his name? He just came out with the
I don't know either, and I
yeah,
hope we haven't messed it up, but that's
yeah.
my
I,
guess
I
too.
apologize if I did. But anyway, he's got a great book out, Bigger Than Fashion, which is the first. I mean, there's I guess High Snob had done a streetwear book that's more like a coffee table book, but it's the first like narrative nonfiction
Right.
uh, story of streetwear, and he can go in more detail on that. Had I known he was writing that, it was going to come out the exact same day as my book, maybe I would have felt less pressure to include some
Right.
menswear and streetwear stuff in there. But streetwear to me is because I had gotten into it in 98 or 99 when it was so small. It was just like this tiny, tiny
Sure.
cult of people. And I was on the fringes of it. And the fact that now it's gigantic and at the very top echelons of the fashion industry and has changed the way people dress around the world. It feels indulgent to be like, well, I was part of that, so therefore I'm going to talk about it. But at the same time, it's like I really do think it's a legitimate trend.
Yeah, I do. Indulgent is an interesting word because I feel like the thing that this book is not at all, to my mind, is indulgent. Like it is a very straight. Telling of the facts is probably not the right way to put it because who knows, the facts will shift and raise and lower in terms of their importance, but you don't privilege your experience or your access to a lot of these people that I know just from us knowing each other personally or having heard you talk over the years very much. And I think that's admirable. By the same token, I wonder to what extent you applied a filter or a code of ethics or whatever around your relationship with people that you know. Like you obviously
Yeah.
have had a long relationship with Nego. I'd imagine you've had a long relationship with Pharrell. There are many others in the book that we could imagine, but those are the two that come to mind immediately. So that's one question. And then the second question is, in thinking about that, then did that inform the your selection of the people who recur throughout the book and become the poles in it? Gavin McInnes being one, Pharrell being another. Tim Ferriss weirdly shows up a couple of
Yeah,
times.
yeah, yeah.
Kanye shows up obviously a number of
A
times.
lot,
Like,
yeah.
yeah. Like, so
I mean,
anyway, I'll stop there.
yeah.
But
No, on that token, I would have loved to have not had to write about anyone I know
okay,
because because I don't want to have to deal with the conflict of interest. And so my rule is more or less just anytime it's somebody I have. I mean, I don't have a long relationship with Pharrell, but it's like I only want to use the public available facts.
got it.
Right.
Okay,
I never dipped into any kind of like personal knowledge. And if I knew Pharrell or didn't know Pharrell, it doesn't matter because everything I write about him, I think I would have written about him in the same way. And so that, like, to
okay,
me, it's like it was really important to keep things separate. Um, like Gavin McInnes is interesting. I mean, he's someone that I was not close. I was in New York, but I was on the fringes of all of those things. I didn't know him, but being in the fringes of it and being like an intern, 23 or whatever in New York, and at our event on Tuesday, Emily Sundberg had talked about the role of New York media, and I do think what was interesting about that time was you're downtown and I was working on Clinton Street and A Life and Rivington Club just opened. And,
sure.
so there's all these retail spaces in which it's like your media and you're walking around, you're meeting people and seeing stuff. You're going to events, you're going to Dietz projects, you're like seeing all these people. And then you're picking up The Voice and you're picking up the New Days and Confused or whatever. And then, Ryan McGinley's taking photos with Gavin and then everyone's talking about those articles. And so there was a real kind of loop. So you felt like you knew who all the players were in that scene, even if you didn't know them personally. And my feeling, the reason I've like kind of obsessed with Gavin McInnes is because at that time he was starting to do things that were transgressively right wing that I felt as just like a kind of um, corny liberal, I guess. We're like, you shouldn't do that, Gavin. You shouldn't wear a pin badge from a Nazi rock band on your jacket. Like, I don't care how ironic it is. Like, it's just not cool. I don't think that's good. And then everyone around me seemed to be like, that's a really lame thing to think because obviously this is just a big ironic joke. And so, yeah, go ahead. I'd
Well,
love to hear what you think.
no, well, I mean, you and I talked about this. Oh, and that's another thing. I don't know if you've heard me mention it because I have on a couple of occasions in this week. But you and I talked early on in your writing process about the book, and because I think you were interested in understanding the perspective from inside Vice, so to
Yeah.
speak. And I came later than really the Vice parts. I started in 2004, but was able to understand, enough of, I think, the gestalt to, and I had admired is the wrong word, but I had been very interested in it and had thought of it as being an important sort of contributor to culture prior to my arrival. Anyway, in the book, you describe you credit me and Lauren and Gian and a couple other people as witnesses,
Yeah.
which I thought was, I mean, I thought was very interesting to
That's a reference to
as a way of
Reds, the movie with the Warren Beatty movie.
Warren Beatty, which I've never seen. I'm
Yeah.
familiar, but I've never
Okay.
seen
So
it.
Reds, there's in Reds, it keeps cutting to these real life people who are like leftists in the, I guess, early 20th century, talking about even whether they knew John Reed or whether, their interest in socialism or whatever, but they're listed as witnesses. I thought that was kind of a cool term. But and I didn't want to do acknowledgments this time. I wanted to do a credits page. And so I was thinking about like the credits were like, yeah, I talked to people and I wanted to hear from them, both their ideas of, what's going on, but also the specifics. And so I knew that you were a great person to talk to early on to make sure I wasn't going just into a crazy direction.
Well, look, I was very, I mean, A, I was flattered to be acknowledged, and then B, that term witness, which I didn't realize was a reference, but it made me think, and I mentioned this last night, when we saw each other, but it made me start to think about how I could possibly be a witness to this 21st century and how wide my aperture would have to be to really effectively witness that. And then that made me think about, okay, well, if the aperture is this wide, then that means that the peaks of it have to be shrunk down to like, very small verticality. And so in that regard, it to me, it makes the achievement of the book that much more interesting because you've managed to discern the mountains from a great distance, even though they're not very tall. Getting back to the question you asked me about Vice, though, my feeling is that it was a bit until the bit ate the Joker. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like it was a perform, and I think I probably told you this back in the day. It was like that felt like it was a performance, and then it became suddenly a method acting situation that he couldn't get out of, and now he's just stuck there forever.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the other point of that, and the New York Times did a review of the book today that really focused on that side of the book, like
Oh,
the
interesting. Okay, I
counter,
haven't seen it
the
yet.
what I call the counterculture in the sense of which I really do think starts with Gavin and goes to 4chan and Groypers and now all these menswear, and that's sorry, not menswear, manosphere influences, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not a through line in the sense that 4chan had probably never read Vice. They never saw it. It's not that they got
Yeah,
anything from Gavin. It's just that Gavin got to the idea earliest
yeah,
that to be transgressive in a way that people are like, whoa, you're breaking the rules. That in the pattern of how in the 60s that used to be more left wing or anti middle class kind of sentiments, that the transgressiveness had flipped from being left to right. And he was just the
right.
first person basically of the century to make that discovery. But, the kids on 4chan made the discovery on their own. They didn't need the influence. But it's just when Gavin shows back up as the head of the Proud Boys, there was a moment where it's like, I've been told this is a bit, I was like kind of shamed into like you shouldn't think this is something political, it's just a bit, and then suddenly it's like aha, like the
Yeah.
thing that I knew was going to happen happened.
Well, but by the same token, when the Proud Boys started, there were people. It was definitely not clear that it was not a bit at that time. Like there were people who had been longtime friends and collaborators of his who later very strongly disavowed him and the Proud Boys, who were in the Proud Boys to begin with because they thought it was continuing to be a bit. So like the illusory nation or nature or the deceptive. I don't mean that he was being deceptive exactly. I think he was just caught up in this wave that he couldn't get out of, and it probably still is. Anyway, I wanted to get back to something you said a minute ago about the conversation on Tuesday at St. Joseph's University in New York with Emily Sundberg. One of the things that you said, because the conversation started to turn to like the New York media reading. I thought it was interesting that Emily mainly cited your mentions of Gia Tolentino, Kalcheka, Venkatesh Rao, which happened late in the book and are sort of very pertinent to her, what I perceive to be her media universe.
Yep.
Um, but and you said to me last night, like commenting on the New York media scene is not my forte. I thought you did fine, but where I'm getting with all of this is that you made a comment which was like, it feels like in the modern ecosystem, you can only talk about writers or people that you know. And
We can only
I
praise
wanted you to,
them.
I wanted you to expand on that a little bit because I thought it was a really interesting observation and one that is both emblematic of the kind of like network effect slash algorithmic reinforcement slash clout chasing that we all are in like kind of beholden to do to some degree, but also that it implies a lack of critical distance that is I wonder to what extent you've been thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, this is my like number one existential crisis around doing this kind of work in the sense that, and I don't want to like say I practice cultural criticism the right way, and everyone else doesn't. But for me, like the number one thing I want to do is write something, and I want people to say, great idea, great idea. I challenge this one, and have a good faith dialogue and try to move towards some sort of uh, mutual recognition of human knowledge or something. I mean, I don't want to get like too idealistic about it, but it's just if I have this book come out, and someone's like, agree with all these parts, but I here's a counterpoint to this, but takes it seriously, like I think this is in good faith, then I would have no problem with critique. And in some ways, that's what
Sure.
I want. I think when Status and Culture came out, there was a Michelle Goldberg uh, op-ed about it. In the book, it wasn't out yet, and the op-ed was glowing. It was really kind of breathtakingly like what you would want someone to say about your own work. Like, wow, okay, you're amazing. And it just launched all these substacks of people that were just like, this sounds stupid. Like, oh, Bourdieu already said that, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, none of you have read the book. It's all like hearsay from an op-ed about the book or an opinion piece
Right. Sure.
about the book. And so that really bothered me in the sense of what will not happen is they're not gonna read the book ever now, and then they're
Right.
going to, if they read the book and they liked it, they're not gonna go out and be like, I was wrong about it.
Sure.
And in general, I just started tracking, like, here are all the cultural critics I like. Let me see where they're praising people or critiquing people. And it's like, oh, you're all praising each other's work or saying, go buy someone's book because they're friends in real life.
Right.
And so I noticed these patterns. And so um, it was very frustrating in the sense that if you're literally not in New York hanging out with people as friends, um, there is a bit of, well, who's this person to like, why we don't, if we all pretend like it didn't exist, then no one has to think about it. This is great.
Yeah.
Uh and so this is all very petty. This is an incredibly petty conversation on all sides, but the
I
thing
don't think so.
ultimately is the degree. It's like, I want to write things, and I want people to read them, and they don't have to like them, and they don't have to agree with them, but to have a good faith conversation about them. And there's a lot of bad faith conversation about delegitimizing the author as a way to not deal with arguments. And there's a lot of kind of, we're just not going to talk about it. Or I'm not going to name the podcast, but like a famous podcast was like, we would like to have you as a guest. And then suddenly it's like, oh, sorry, we're not going to have you as a guest. And then a week later, there was a podcast about Status where they had gone through my bibliography and found someone else to talk about it. And it's just like, okay, so things like that are,
That's super corny, but okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like there's all these petty squabbles, and because I'm a writer, I'll remember all of them until I die. Like I have
Yeah.
a chart in my head where it's like that happened in 2023. But I guess for me it's like, so my remedy to it, because I'm very hypersensitive about it, is I read a ton of I try to read everybody's work,
Sure.
right? And there was stuff I couldn't get to this round, but it's like I try to read everybody. I usually find something good, even if I don't like the way it's written, or even if I don't agree with it. There's probably something in there, unless I'm just like totally think it's wrong or it's being too polemical in the wrong direction. And I tend to go out and praise books or praise articles of people I don't know, because
Yeah.
I've just like starting to start this trend of like, just find good stuff and tell people about it. And sometimes people are really like, wow, that's incredible that I don't even know you and you're being nice about my work. And then sometimes it's just like, well, this is creepy. This person I don't know has now retweeted my thing. And
Yeah.
so
No, sorry. Finish that thought.
no, it's just like this really weird social dynamic that uh I don't know how to navigate, but ultimately, if you're in the space of cultural critique, you have to think about it. You can't just simply be like, I'm going to write some stuff and hopefully people read it. They won't read it unless it gets into the discourse, and it can't get into the discourse unless you have already built some sort of bridges with people.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of stuff I've written. Like there's an article I wrote that was kind of about the is culture stagnating narrative.
Yeah.
Spencer Kornhaber had done a big piece for the Atlantic. I thought it was pretty good. It had most of it in there. I just like, there's this narrative piece that I didn't think he had in there. I wrote that. Catherine D did a response to my piece pushing back against it, but it was totally in good faith. And then I was like pushing her piece, was like, this is a great, pushback. And now like we're connected. And so it's like, that's the thing that you
Yeah.
want.
This is the Labubu. This is the great Labubu discourse of the second quarter of 2025.
No, this is later. That's later. With Labubu's, it's the same thing. It was just like Labubu, but Labubu's is great because, yeah, Amanda Mole did a great story, and then I wanted to say a bit
Ah, right.
about
Okay.
the
Sorry. I knew it
China
was
bit,
I knew it was the
and
Atlantic. I forgot that it was Amanda's.
yeah,
Yeah.
And then Kyle Chayka did a piece that referenced both of it, But so again, it's like that to me, that's your dream, is like getting yourself in the conversation. Now, there's one more piece about this, and I was just I just had breakfast with my agent, as you do when you're in New York,
I mean, you're a
uh,
fancy author, a highfalutin bestseller.
and that's where we had pancakes. And she was like, yeah, it's a really good point, because every author now has to have a personal brand.
Yeah,
And if you're going to review another author's work, what you're not going to do is be like, yeah, that's pretty good. It's great, or whatever, because it's like, well, then you didn't add your color, you didn't add your take into it.
right,
So
sure.
either you're going to be sharp elbows and be like, well, this take is stupid because I'm better than that person, or you're going to, I mean, I think you can do is you could be additive. You like that, great idea. Here's something else to like think about on top of that and add your bit. But basically, it's like there's an economy of takes. And the number one thing about that, you need product differentiation. So you're not going to write a take that's like that person said it perfectly,
Right.
and so you just get this dynamic of, especially if you're writing the same things as other people, it just becomes very, very ornery very quickly, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yeah. Well, so a couple questions about the that whole, like self-referential circle of friends or colleagues or frenemies or whatever you want to call them. Um, one, so by the way, Mordecai continues to blow up the comments as is his wont. Mordecai, we see you. I can't answer all
I'm not
everything that you're
looking
writing,
yet because
but
it's going to be too
but
distracting, but yes.
no, exactly. Well, that's exactly it. But Mordecai asks if you still live in Japan, and you do.
Yes.
What I wondered about was to what extent does living in Japan and in Tokyo in particular, like give you enough of a connection to feel plugged into this, but enough of a critical distance to feel like you can be objective about it, or maybe it doesn't. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out was like you last night assembled a group of us in a means to create dialogue around like culture in the 21st century. What do we do about it? But it made me feel like a little bit of an attempt at creating scenius, right? This term of like where you put a bunch of people in a room and it creates a kind of a wave. The that's difficult to do in New York, we know, because of the cost of living. Something you said with Emily the other night was that you can still do it in Tokyo because the cost of living in Tokyo, and I think your quote was, you can find an apartment for $400 easy, which stunned me. Absolutely stunned. I immediately started texting my son and being like, "You're moving to Japan after college." But in any case, I guess those two vectors, like how do you maintain critical distance while at the same time trying to foment a manageable community that drives ideas forward?
Look, they're slightly different questions, although I'll try to bring them together. But
Yes,
the
sorry,
the
that's true.
yeah, no, but no, the first bit is just like being in Japan. Am I someone who should be commenting on American
Yeah,
culture at
no,
all?
no, no,
And
no,
I'm
no. I'm not questioning your bona fides to comment. I'm
yeah,
more like trying to figure out if it adds a quality or adds a level of difficulty.
I think it takes you out of, my guess is that I can see more clearly the big picture just because you're
Sure,
not in the details every day. And I've explained this a couple times too, which is there's this weird dynamic where when I wake up at 6 a.m. in Japan and the first thing I do is check Blue Sky or X, which is horrible and I don't recommend any of you do it. I wish I could do something else with my life. And it's always like one eye open because I can't even, open both eyes. And I'm just like, oh God, what happened today? But the point is that I see all the news that broke that day, because that will be basically end of the Eastern time in workday. I'll know most of the news that broke. And then as the day progresses in Japan, there's not that much more breaking news. And by afternoon, there's almost no breaking news. And
sure,
so you just like stop looking at news. So you have this nice thing of like, I caught up on the day, the stock market's closed. Now I'm going to enjoy my day in Tokyo. And when I wake up the next day, I'll get this like summary view of what happened in the US. And
sure.
so it means like I can get the news without it being, but like living in it. And so when I come home for Christmas every year, and my mom is just blaring MSNBC for just who knows why, just like at the loudest volume possible. And I'm always having to turn it down, and she turns it back up. But I'm like, oh, news breaks like all day in the United States. Like you're living in this like constant breaking news zone, and that must be miserable because you don't have a break from it. So I think Tokyo is it's a nice balance, which is that I still can feel plugged in, especially as culture is happening online. It's like I am plugged in. I saw a review that said he must be someone who is extremely online, and the examples he's picking, and like, yeah, I think that's true, which is that I'm not sitting there watching TV. There's not a lot of TV shows. I've just never watched, what is it, Vanderpump Rules or
Vanderpump
whatever.
Rules. Yeah, me
Yeah,
neither. But yeah,
yeah, it's like I've never seen that because it's like, and I'm sure it's on streaming, but it's just that kind of thing is not how I'm spending my time. But I will see memes and I will see those things. The
sure.
second question on, making a scene, I have this, I think in writing this book, it radicalized me in a sense. And you haven't gotten to the last chapter, but I think
Interesting.
just writing the last chapter was like, yeah, this shit's fucked up. It's like basically like the place I landed on, and it's just a sense of like the internet and spending all your time online is not good for us, and these apps are getting worse. Everything that people say, it really is true. It's like this is just making me feel bad, and I want to do something else. And so and part of that, I was like, what do I enjoy? And what I enjoy is meeting real people in real life and having
Yeah, yeah.
conversations and not looking at my phone. And it's incredible. Okay, if that's true, there used to be a long time ago all these things like called cocktail parties where people would like come together and talk. Why don't we just do more of that? Because if I had a cocktail party every Thursday, I'd be psyched. Like that
Yeah.
I had this thing where I can go meet people. And so I was like, well, I'm waiting around for someone else to fix the problem. And one of the things also, like you reach a certain age and a certain level of success or stature or whatever, where you're like, oh, it's up to me now. Like I could just
Yeah,
do
yeah, for
it.
sure.
And so I started like a small, tiny little social club experiment in Tokyo with some people. And the feedback was just immensely, like instantly, like, wow, like this is great. Let's do more of this. And so when I was thinking about, like in New York, I'm going to do book events, I'm going to promote the book. But what I'd actually like to do is bring all my friends together. But when you bring your friends together, it's like a wedding where you're like you you brought everyone you love together and you can talk to all of them for 10 seconds and be like, oh,
Yeah,
how
yeah, yeah,
was
for
the
sure.
flight? Great. Okay,
Sure.
bye. And so I was like, instead of just doing that, why don't I want everyone to talk to each other? And there's a bonus of you want these people who may not know these people to kind of meet up and have build these connections. And I'm doing it because no one else is doing it, and I don't even know if this is something I've ever thought about doing before. I kind of like from I wouldn't say I'm like a super introverted person, but in general, like I'm very just like I do my thing and I do it at my own pace, and I don't try to like create big bureaucracies or
Sure.
group things. And so I'm doing it just because I feel like there's a need. And then I've done it now a couple times where it's like, oh, people really like this, and I'm not going to become a party promoter. Probably that's not my like next thing. But I encourage
You could
all
be
of you.
the new Brett Bolthouse. You'd be the new yeah, anyway, sorry. Never mind.
Yeah.
I'm not going to think of party promoters right now.
But I guess the point is like I encourage all of you to do this, which is just like if you find excuses to bring your friends together, they will love it. And that's I think the thing that we felt. Um and then also just to start the conversation and to the other thing I'm fighting in my head and is just that we have been told and we feel that this kind of deep critical thinking that's too pretentious, but like there's something corny or cynical, there's something very cynical that's making us think that trying to make a better world is corny.
Right.
And especially if you came out of some of the scenes that we came out of that were based so much on like transgressive stuff. The streetwear scene was not trying to make the world a better place. That's not like one of the things that's been obsessed with. And so I can't solve all of the world's problems, nor will I try to, and I don't have any expertise on clean drinking water, and I'm not going to like contribute to that. But I felt
Right.
like the thing that I'm interested in is I believe in the power of culture. I believe that good culture has all these really positive effects on society, and so I should be trying to not only bring people together to solve those problems, but also to kind of destigmatize the
Right.
idea that somebody,
Exemplify the idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's like my responsibility to do that.
It's funny you should say that because it's I don't know that we've talked about this, but I spent my first 4 years after college in New York or his first 3 years in New York, getting the city dialed and feeling really good about it. And then I got transferred from on a work thing to Sydney in Australia, and I had to restart in this entirely different culture, which was very the worst thing I always tell people, like the worst thing you can be in Australia, or at least at that time, the worst thing you could be in Australia is a tryhard. And so like this notion of exerting any effort at all into being cool or bringing cool people together was like very, very verboten. And it has a cousin in the whole idea of resisting the sellout and stuff, which we can talk about in a second. But what it has always meant to me is that I want the effort to be made to bring people together in that way, but I feel allergic to showing the work. And so something like Breakfast Club, for instance, is just like, you just go. I don't like, we're not doing anything other than just
Yep.
congregating. Like there's no
Yep.
theme involved. And it feels like there has to be more of that sense of just get over yourself. You don't have to show up with a qualification. You don't have to show up with an agenda. You don't have to show up with a pitch or whatever. Um, but I think, and this gets to a question I want to ask you. I think the kids are kind of figuring that out on their own, which I find encouraging. I am a glass half full person, so I would think that, but I also
Yep.
I get the sense that they are, and I wonder if you're seeing that too. If you feel there are
Yep.
any indications of that now.
I mean, not just the kids. I mean, I really think there are self-healing properties of culture, and one of them is simply human beings follow where the value is. And so
Yeah,
for a long
sure.
time in the 21st century, the value was the internet. Like the internet was fun, and if you had interest, you could go deeper on those interests. If you liked acquiring difficult things, it was easier to acquire difficult things. So the value was online, and I think it's the last 5 years where it crested in the sense of like the
Yeah, for
value
sure.
of being online and now the downsides of being online are higher. And so the natural response is I'm thinking about it in terms of almost like political action,
Sure.
which is like, how do we like change this? But it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's just you can just be offline more, and you can hang out with people more. And I
Right.
think that's just what's happening. And so one of the things I noticed is that restaurants, restaurant reservations became the new status symbol. And Amanda Mull had done a good story about that, and we all just know it. If you listen to How Long Gone, it's like they're just talking about restaurants the entire time.
Of course.
And that that to me is like, okay, that what's cool about a restaurant? Well, it's a real place, it's real food. Like maybe people are annoyingly Instagramming it, but like it's still you go with a person and you're there in real life, and it's hard to be in these spaces. And so that to me seems like, okay, we're moving away from media and media experiences being the thing that was enjoyable to real life is enjoyable. And so if the kids are moving that direction, I wouldn't be shocked. If the kids aren't on phones anymore, I wouldn't be shocked because it's just the phone sucks. Like that's why
My
they're moving
my
away from it.
my son, in a conversation on Monday with Kyle Raymond Fitzpatrick and me, my son, who acts as the series producer for our podcast, he said, I think there's going to be a Butlerian jihad, which I was very concerned about because I was like, what does that mean? And he's like, oh, it's like from Frank Herbert from Dune predicted that they were just going to get rid of robots because they're not worth the trouble, essentially. And I'm like, all right, if there's a 19-year-old out there thinking like that's the inevitable progression, maybe everything isn't totally fucked.
And that actually brings me back to like why I liked Dune so much. And so like as much as I'm always like my like brand is like this guy thinks you shouldn't even talk about pop culture, but it's like I saw Dune, I was like, this is such a great movie. And I guess barely read the books as a kid, or I read the first
Sure.
book and pretended like I read the book. But
Right.
the movie, the thing I loved about it, and I didn't realize until I understood the mythology of it, which is that they get rid of computers. It's all these rituals. It's just this ritual based
Sure.
society. And so you see the scene where it's like they go to the planet where they're getting the emperor's army ready, and they're just doing this bizarro religious ceremony, and they're like chanting, and there's like the drip, putting these people's blood on them. um that's incredible, just seeing ritual. And so I think I
Right.
love ritual, and like I think that's like the line that goes too far, where it's like I would love to have a dress code at things. I would love to have more ritual.
Sure.
um and I think that's some people just hate ritual and they're never going to do it, so I don't want to push that on them. But I do think there's something about the Dune universe as being really, it's just more tactile and interesting because it's not just a bunch of screens.
Right.
And that
There
is
has
where
been
that movie works.
there's been a lot of conversation of late about texture or tension or friction as being the thing that makes life valuable, I guess, in some ways. And I don't mean at an existential level, like a, who gets to live, who gets to die kind of way, but in more in a quality of life way. And it is intriguing to think about ritual as an expression of effort against some level of friction, and therefore the thing is kind of valuable. Um, I, I wanted to ask a slightly different question, though, just digressing from this. There's an asterisk review of the book, which I don't know if you've seen
Yeah.
yet, that describes it as comprehensively pessimistic,
Yep.
which jumped out at me a little bit because I guess I understand where that comes from, but I don't really see it. And maybe I'm colored by the fact that we know each other, and you're not like
Yep.
an arch pessimist by any stretch of the imagination. But when you are confronted with an assessment like that, do you look at it and go, yeah, actually, I am a pessimist, or actually that person missed the forest for the trees completely, or something else?
Yeah, I am a cynical optimist. That's my like the
Okay.
way I think about things. So it's like I'm always believe there's solutions. I'm always like moving towards solutions, being optimistic about that we can fix it. So I'm not there's no sense of despair about anything. But I am quite cynical that the forces that create a system are never aligned towards the good outcomes. And so if
Sure.
I it's like, oh, it's incredible. This pop singer co-writes all of their music. That's so great. So like maybe optimistic, naive take would be like, yeah, they like Taylor Swift and Max Martin get in a room and they're like, and Taylor's like, I got this idea, and Max Martin's like, okay, what if we structure it this way?
We
And that's
made
how
it
it
to
works, right?
52 minutes without talking about Taylor, and now, okay, all right, anyway,
Yeah,
go ahead.
but then the cynical thing is to be like, well, there's a lot of evidence anecdotally, and people in the
Okay,
industry talk about it. That, and I can't say that this is true for Taylor, and obviously she writes her lyrics, so like that's fine. But that an artist will, yeah, artist will go to a songwriter or a producer and say, we will use your song if if we are added as a
sure.
songwriter, and the contribution can be literally one word change or nothing, and so it's unknown. So to be cynical is to say, I think there's a chance that what is being represented in the story we're being told is just not true, and
Right,
to
sure.
dig into that and to figure out what that is like. Um, but it's not to be, this to be cynical optimistic means to understand all those forces and then to try to say, now that we've stripped down to know what's really going on, how do we solve it, rather than working from this fake public relations naive model of the way the world works. So that I get that. I mean, so I think the cynicism sometimes, or the skepticism is maybe a better way to say it can feel pessimistic. I think the book just ends on a really pessimistic note because the last COVID to now has just not been a great time. I think there's
Sure.
been
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
like some incredible works of art that have come out, but the overwhelming narratives are not good. And the election of Trump, which politically was not for, I voted for the other candidate. Then that felt bad because that was really like, okay, like I don't know why I'm even thinking about America and politics so much because I don't live there. This is making me feel bad. And so the book ends, and I don't want to give away the final paragraph before the conclusion because it's very meaningful, how bleak that two sentence paragraph is, and I had added additional sentence because things got even bleaker, and I'll save it for you. But the point is that the last bit is so bleak that you can go back and say, okay, the whole thing was bleak.
I see. Okay, got
But
it.
I'll tell you, when I talk about omnivorism, which is the belief that like you can take high and low, you can take west and east, you can take everything and mash it together, that was a incredibly good source of cultural change for a long time. So I think what the Neptunes and what early Kanye was doing was mashing all this stuff together, and it worked. It was really innovative. At the end, when it's like there's nothing left except for country and rap hate each other, and then it's like, okay, now we're gonna have country rap. Okay, it was like great. Now there's literally nothing that's not
There's
mixed in the mix.
right.
And so it's not that that is that it was anyone's fault for doing those things. Like Shibuzi is not the problem, but it's that once you get to that point, you can't look at fusion, genre fusion anymore as this obvious source of cultural change. So you can be pessimistic in the sense of this avenue is closed. It was a good avenue, it closed. But then there's things where
Right.
it's like the counterculture, where it's like, well, I think this is actually a bad thing, and that was a bad trend, and everybody involved with it is not contributing to the health of the culture. So but the one thing I want to say is that it stings to say it is comprehensively pessimistic, because my feeling also was a worry that this book is too pessimistic. And some of the reason that I wanted to talk to everybody last night was that um, I feel almost a sense of guilt or a sense of anxiety
Sure.
about that negativity, and I want to, in as quickly as possible, say, all right, this is bad, but we're like, today starts the new era. Today
Sure.
starts a new possibility. Let's
Yeah.
start moving to solutions.
Well, so to that end, one of the things that I was curious about, I like having come to this discussion throughout my career, mainly from the commercial side of things, like being responsible for money and having been well incentivized and having been successful at it, is that I I think one of the big missing elements of our discourse generally is like, where is the incentive for the counterparties in any dynamic, right? Like
Yep.
in the days of digital media, it's you've got editorial people who are trying to do page views because they've been told they have to do page views. No, they don't really know why, but it's just that's, or at least the ones, many of them that I worked with didn't know why. And on the other hand, you have the commercial people who are supposed to get money, but no, but you don't ever talk about why. It's because the incentives are opaque to the counterparties, and we don't do enough talking about that. From your perch, where do you see non-natively, let's call it culturally additive people? Where can we incentivize them to fund those who are culturally additive, especially in a climate where the NEA gets cut, NPR gets cut, you know, like generally speaking, anybody can become a creator, so it's harder to filter. Like, do you see places where that can happen naturally as to start the boulder rolling down the hill?
I do think we live in a time in which people are willing to pay the people they like quite a bit. And so, I mean, the entire influencer economy is saying, I
That's
love
true.
this person's Instagram content, and now they've made a limited edition lip balm, so I'm going to buy the lip balm or whatever it is. So I think that's happening to a certain degree. I guess my take on it also is that you went directly to like how to fund it, and it's a money problem. And this is the other thing I'm trying to get my head around. And I don't, I feel a bit of self-critique here too, because I don't want to be too naive. But I just think like, what was the motivation for Sonic Youth? Like when Sonic Youth were like, let's have a band, were they like, we're going to make a ton of money being Sonic Youth? I think they knew that they had to work menial jobs to do Sonic Youth. They had to tour and
Yeah.
live and like sleep on people's couches. And but the motivation, the incentive for them had nothing. The money was just like, we just have to have this bare minimum that makes
Yeah.
us not
Well,
die.
sorry, I don't know if I use. I guess I did
Incentive,
use the
yeah.
term fund. I was trying not to use the term money because it, like the incentive. What is my incentive for having this conversation, right? Like, how
Yep.
much is Substack paying me? Basically, nothing. You know, how many incremental book sales are you going to get out of this? Who knows? Hopefully, a lot, but let's be realistic. But our incentive for doing it is because there's going to be an exchange of information and because we like each
Yep.
other and so on and so forth. Like that is incentive also. So
Yes.
you know, how do we
No, no,
demonstrate
and
to
that's my point. That's my point,
yeah,
which is that like that art is created by a lot of different incentives. And I think we immediately go to like, if there's a cultural crisis, then oh, we need more money incentive to, or money insurance in a way for people to go off and do things.
sure,
It is great if, people create a new uh payment ecosystem or whatever it is that helps people get paid and that it sustains it. So I wouldn't take anything away from that, but it just throughout all of history, there's been people who have created amazing art without any kind of monetary
sure.
incentive. And I guess the question is, is that just gone because the cost of living is too high or is it gone because the working a side job it doesn't work? I really want to talk. Have you done a thing with Elijah? The he's like a
No,
DJ cultural thinker in the UK, but
no.
I want to do something with him soon. I think he's coming to Tokyo, and
Well,
we'll do a
Elijah,
talk or
so
something.
just for the audience's benefit and mine too, Elijah.
I think it's just Elijah. That's why I didn't say
Oh,
a last
okay.
name because it's just Elijah. You can find him
I'm
online.
not
I mean,
familiar. I'm not familiar.
he is always like everybody in the music industry has a day job. We have to stop stigmatizing day jobs because
Yeah,
every single person has a day job. And so one of the problems of especially this economy now is that because you have influencers who really have turned it into their real life, and they can be make six figures or more or a lot of money off Substack or off Instagram or whatever it is, then it makes it even harder to be like, well, I'm a cultural creator, but I have to subsidize it through some boring day job. That you're supposed to 100% be the person you are. Your personal brand is supposed to be this thing. So, that old technique of just we were talking last night about, Futura 2000 had to go work at Kinko's for many
right.
years before he kind of bounced back as a major artist. And so that like there still is a stigma to that. And some of the solution, I think, to me is just let's start with, can we get people who do really creative and innovative things to be rewarded by the most important critics, like the most, because that is really valuable. If
Yeah,
John Caramonica does like this album is incredible, you've never heard of these people, it's so interesting. That is a huge boost, and it is an incentive for a young artist to be like, wow, the New York Times is really supportive of me. I think 100 gecs getting John Caramonica's endorsement is great. Like I think that helps boost them. So getting critics to imbue the value they have into new artists really makes a huge difference. And so I want those artists to feel like I'm going to take some challenges, whatever medium they're in, and then the people who think about these things the most and have the best taste are going to say, like, maybe you won't understand this, but this is incredible, and introduce them to people. And that's the first set of incentives that have to happen, which is
yeah,
that dialogue and cultural value that gets um, that critics or introducers or whoever it is, curators, whatever term you want to use, those middle people in saying this is important, I'm telling you about it, I'm telling you it's good, that is what makes something go beyond just yet another artwork.
yeah. I'm intrigued by all of this, partially for my own curiosity and partially because I want to give sage advice to my kids who are, approaching the stages of not only being able to contribute as standalone, individuals, but also because they're I worry for their, generations, etc. Do you have kids, David? I don't know. I've never asked you that. Are they of an age where you're thinking about this for their sake, or are you not there yet? Or are you past that point?
I mean, they're both. I don't want to get specifically into them too much, but like they're both so pursuing things that have no uh economic value at all, that at this point it's like I'm just like, hope things work out. But it's more so I just can't think about it too much because it's not like uh I didn't think about it at that age at all. I mean,
Right,
it's
sure.
in some ways like I growing up in Pensacola, Florida, and then before that Mississippi and Oklahoma, and having a dad in academics. Um, there Pensacola, Florida has no industry basically. So if you're living in one of these towns, the only jobs that exist are doctor and lawyer. There's no
Sure.
businessman. There's no like marketing manager or whatever. And so
Right, sure.
for my parents, it's like you go to college and you become either a doctor or a lawyer, because those are the two jobs that are successful and stable. And then then my sister had an English degree and ended up in advertising and was like working in copywriting. I was going really well, and it was like, that's a job, you could do that, and we don't even
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
And but the point is, like, you have your entire life to figure that out. And what's insane at the moment is kids go to college and then they have to do the freshman year internship and then the sophomore year internship, and it's so pre-professional, so quickly. And I understand that the job market may have those pressures, and you can't do anything about it. But it has changed. But the point is, I don't want to be the force to be like, hey, we gotta think about, are we gonna get you into a McKinsey job in 5 years or 6 years or whatever.
Oh yeah, I guess it's less that I worry about the specific placements, and it's more I want them to understand that they can contribute in a way that,
Hmm.
because I think, and especially just sort of to close the conversation out, like when you read this book, eh, and you think about the span of all of those individual little note card sized developments that add up to the collective whole, you start to think, what difference could I possibly make here? And I think the interesting thing about it is that is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is there are a bunch of individuals, and you do a good job here, and you have done a good job in Amatora as well, of like going, actually, it's like five guys. And they're not necessarily men, but it's like there are like five people who really, through their own initiative or through their own proximity or through their own, you know, where just like natural wherewithal, drove this thing. And I want to give my kids the sense like that's possible.
Hmm.
And so that's the reason I asked the question.
And
Um,
I would say there, I know you're trying to close it out, but I would just agree and also say the best stuff starts with people just saying, I'm going to do this for my five friends and we're going to think it's
that's right.
cool.
That's right.
And so, I mean, again, culture is different than the economy, and it's different than the environment. It's different than global health, which is in my own behavior of not using plastic straws, I'm just not going to uh, save the planet. But with culture, Malcolm McLaren is just a nobody at some point, and then the Sex Pistols are the biggest thing in the UK, and then punk rock is a massive thing around the world. And so it always starts with these fringe characters, and
Yeah.
you can never aspire to like you can aspire towards it. You can never guarantee that you'll succeed from the fringes to the middle, but there's always that possibility in a way that of other fields it's almost impossible.
Yeah. Well, look, David, I view your work as a, essential reference, and taken through the right vantage point, a kind of an instruction manual on how that could all work. So, uh, very pleased that, I'm very pleased to be a part of this, of the broad association, and I think you're doing great work. So I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to whatever comes next.
Yeah,
Um,
and thanks for having me. It's great that we could do this when I was in New York in real time. But and I made this point, and I just want to make this point to listeners too. It's that the newsletter. It reminds me just how much great cultural work is being done. Like there's just every week so many great articles, and to have them together is super useful. But it's also just encouraging, which is the sense of the culture may be bad, but cultural criticism is not in a bad place. Like people
right.
are writing and doing incredible reporting, and that part's exciting. So thanks for that.
Well, and no, I mean, everybody else does the work. I just aggregate it. All right. Well, listen, everybody. This has been a special edition of Sick Talks. This is number 111 with W. David Marx, author of Blank Space, which, if you have not already bought it, you should go buy immediately. Listen to the audiobook, read the actual book, keep it on your library, talk to people about it, and then take its lessons, go out and see people, patronize culture. Don't get too um, bogged down by, the negative stuff. And if you can consume like you live in Tokyo, that sounds like a really great way to navigate the modern media ecosystem. All right, everybody. David, thanks again.
Thanks, Ben.
See you soon. You bet.
Bye.